The return of tariffs. From the chicken war to Trump's economic gamble long before tariffs became a headline issue in modern American politics, a forgotten trade dispute quietly reshaped global commerce. In the years following World War II, West Germany developed a strong appetite for chicken, specifically, chicken imported from the United States. By the early 1960s, American poultry producers were exporting tens of millions of dollars worth of chicken to Europe, an amount that would be worth hundreds of millions today. European farmers, unable to compete with the low prices of American poultry, pushed back. In response, the trade organization that would later evolve into the European Union imposed a tariff on imported chicken. Overnight, prices rose sharply, imports collapsed, and a trade conflict was born. The United States retaliated, not with another food tariff, but by targeting a completely different industry. Washington imposed a 25% tariff on imported trucks, including those made by Germany's Volkswagen. The impact was immediate. German truck sales in the United States were cut in half and never fully recovered. European consumers paid more for chicken, Americans faced fewer vehicle choices, and a single tariff decision reshaped markets for decades. This episode, later known as the Chicken War, remains a textbook example of how tariffs function. They protect specific industries, pressure foreign governments, and often raise prices for consumers on both sides. For much of the past half-century, tariffs played only a limited role in U.S. trade policy. That changed dramatically during the presidency of Donald Trump. Framing tariffs as a tool of economic common sense rather than protectionism, Trump argued that they were essential to restoring American manufacturing strength. His administration revived tariffs as a central policy instrument, reshaping debates that had been largely dormant for decades. To understand how tariffs work in practice, one of the clearest examples comes from 2018, when the Trump administration imposed tariffs on imported washing machines. Under the policy, companies importing washers into the United States were required to pay additional fees to the government. Because profit margins in the appliance industry are thin, those costs were quickly passed on to consumers. As intended, higher prices reduced demand for foreign-made products and gave domestic manufacturers more room to compete. But the effects did not stop there. Prices for American-made washing machines also rose, driven by increased demand and reduced competition. Even dryers, never subject to the tariff, became more expensive, since they are typically purchased alongside washers. There were benefits. Foreign manufacturers such as Samsung and LG opened new factories in the United States, creating roughly 1,800 jobs. The government also collected tens of millions of dollars annually in tariff revenue. But these gains came at a steep cost. Higher prices meant consumers paid over $1 billion more, translating to hundreds of thousands of dollars per job created, an extraordinarily expensive way to boost employment. For economists, this highlighted a central critique of tariffs: they can work, but often at a high and inefficient price. That same year, the Trump administration imposed far broader tariffs on steel and aluminum. Officially justified on national security grounds, these measures were also designed to penalize China for violating international trade rules. Steel and aluminum are critical not only for military equipment, but for everyday products like cars and appliances. As input costs rose, industries dependent on these materials faced squeezed profit margins and increased competition from foreign producers not subject to the same price pressures. Numerous studies found that while some jobs were preserved in steel production, equal or greater numbers were lost in downstream industries that relied on affordable metal. The overall picture was mixed. Manufacturing job losses slowed but did not reverse. Consumers and companies absorbed most of the added costs. Supply chains became more diversified as firms reduced dependence on China, but Beijing's behavior changed little, and in some cases became more confrontational. Despite these drawbacks, a review conducted under the Biden administration concluded that many of Trump's tariffs should remain in place, and in some cases be expanded. Once tariffs exist, they are notoriously difficult to dismantle. Domestic industries grow dependent on them, and policymakers view them as leverage in future negotiations. This persistence explains why, more than 60 years after the Chicken War, the United States still maintains a 25% tariff on imported trucks, even though the original dispute over poultry is long forgotten. Tariffs introduced as temporary measures often become permanent fixtures, shaping markets for generations. Donald Trump's proposed second-term trade agenda would dramatically escalate this approach. He has suggested imposing tariffs as high as 60% on all imports from China and blanket tariffs of 10 to 20% on goods from every other country. Supporters argue that this strategy would force other nations to shoulder the cost of global trade imbalances and provide revenue to offset domestic tax cuts. Critics warn of widespread economic fallout. Independent studies estimate that such a policy could cost the average American household thousands of dollars annually through higher prices, eliminate hundreds of thousands of jobs, and trigger retaliatory tariffs that would shrink U.S. exports. Other nations, economists argue, are unlikely to simply accept such measures. Instead, they would respond in kind, escalating trade conflicts and amplifying economic pain. Trump, however, views tariffs not just as a trade tool, but as a strategic weapon. Over the past 2 decades, China has invested heavily in manufacturing, becoming the world's largest exporter and selling products like steel at prices below market value. Combined with repeated trade violations, this has reshaped global economic norms. Tariffs, in this view, are a way to reset the system, even if the short-term costs are severe. Whether this strategy would ultimately strengthen the U.S. economy or plunge it into prolonged trade wars remains uncertain. What is clear is that tariffs, once again, are at the center of global economic debate. As history has shown, from the Chicken War to modern trade conflicts, these policies rarely end where they begin. And once deployed, their consequences can echo for decades.